everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hello, it's me, Diana Perry Cruz.
Hi, it's me, Jackie McDonald.
So nice to see everybody on this warm spring day here in the springy spring times of New England.
It's in like a lion, out like a lion.
It's pothole season.
I don't know. Spring's the worst. It's the worst.
Season.
It is the worst because you think it's going to be better than it is, and it's always worse than you think.
It's not that warm. It's very wet and gross.
Yeah, you're like, I can't wait for a spring. I can't wait to ruin my car.
Yeah, it's not the majesty of winter and fresh snowfall.
No, there's like that hot second in spring where like, oh, the trees are budding. Oh, that's kind of, but that's more like, it's like, this like precursor summer.
But it really depends on where you live. Like for some people, whenever this is coming out, it's very nice weather.
I refuse to accept that the seasons are not exactly the same everywhere in the world is what I am experiencing. No, it's what that's like.
Or in like 9 years when someone's listening to this and they're like, it is summer and I'm hot and you're talking about spring.
Yeah, totally. And we actually have a lot of international listeners too.
And I'm sure they're enjoying
all kinds of different weather where they live.
Do they enjoy New England fall and they enjoy kind of wet New England spring? I'm sure, just like I said, everyone has the same seasons. That's how seasons work in my narrow view. But this is not a viewpoint about my crazy scientific seasonal statements or even a podcast about...
I don't have narrow views either.
No, I'm doing a bit is what I'm doing there. But it's not a podcast about seasons and our favorite seasons and our worst seasons. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research where every week we pick a topic and then discuss some relevant research. But since it's the start of a new season and this is a pretty busy month in terms of other episodes, we thought this would be a good time to slip in to the grab bag and do a little spring grab bag episode for the year 2025.
Russell.
So for those who are not used to the grab bag episodes, these are episodes where we do not have a central theme. We each just pick articles for the big old bag of research that's out there that speak to us. And it's like a Ouija board. You put your hands on the grab bag and you sort of move around and we all do it together. And then we just find the articles that speak to us from beyond.
I had a dream last night that me and Diana and some other girl went to this house for tea. It was like a tea thing, but the table, you could open it up and there was all these Ouija boards under the table.
Ooh.
Oh.
But there was like paper Ouija boards, there's cardboard Ouija boards, there was like wood Ouija boards, and they were old or new. There was like 100 Ouija boards, and we're like, huh. And that was my dream.
That's a creepy dream.
Wow, who is this other girl? Why was she allowed to come to the tea party with us?
I'm not sure, and I can't remember.
Someone's going to get possessed or murdered in the dream. So it's like it can't be somebody that you like don't want to die. So
then
like, oh no, our new friend Suzanne. Oh,
yeah. Then I looked up because Sylvie had a bloody nose, and so she came into the room and she's like, "I think my nose is bloody." She's just covered in blood. So that was great.
Oh, it's always fun.
Wow.
The wake up, the blood or vomit wake up. But that's not. I didn't. When I last looked through our notes, I don't think anyone had any bloody or vomity articles. So let's see if there's any twists coming that I wasn't expecting, or our listeners. So we have 3 articles. We will announce them as we go. You don't get to hear them at the top as read by Diana because we got to reach into the bag. We got to use our psychic powers. Is everyone all right if I go first with the grab bag?
Go for it.
All right, let's all put our hands together in, light as a feather, stiff as a board. We're going to put our hands on the bag. Oh, I'm feeling a psychic pull. Here, I got it. Ooh, this looks like a good article. Thank you, behavior analysis spirits of the grab bag. I shall be discussing, I wish I'd read it earlier, but I just got out of the bag. So let's do this off the dome. Nevill, Crawford, Zarcone, Maquera, Rooker, and Schmidt 2024 article published in Behavior Analysis and Practice. The name of said article? It's a retrospective, consecutive, controlled case series analysis of the assessment and treatment of elopement in children with autism in an inpatient setting.
I'm not going to lie. When I looked at the articles that we picked this time, I was surprised.
Yeah, Diana was yeah.
They were not our norm article pickings.
Yeah.
So
I'm switch it up. I I commented on that as well. Not that we already know, of course, what's
No.
chosen, but
No.
We have a sense that's what's going to happen. We're looking into the future.
okay.
So we did episodes on elopement, treatment of elopement. We had a great episode with Dr. Megan Boyle on the show talking about elopement treatment, but it's been a while since we'd had any discussions of elopement. And one of the challenges of the assessment and treatment of elopement is that unlike certain behaviors where, aggression or environmental destruction, you really don't get to mess up your elopement treatment because if you're working, say, with a young child or even a child maybe like middle school age, maybe if they get to be adult age and aggression could really do some harm. It's sort of, let's do the best we can to maintain safety. We can do our assessment. We can do it in this space. We'll just use safe materials and all. With elopement, it's sort of you've run away. Where have you run to? I don't know. Or you've run to somewhere that is very unsafe, like out in public where anything can happen because you're not controlling that environment. So elopement's not a behavior that you want to mess around with when you are doing your assessment and treatment. And if you've never done an assessment or treatment of elopement, you really should be working with someone who has, because there's just so much that could go wrong, even with all the precautions that we typically take in assessment and treatment. And I think if you have not listened to Dr. Megan Boyle's episode of the show where we talked about using the ISCA latency FAs in the assessment of elopement, definitely do that because those are some amazing steps for minimizing the risk of elopement. So that is the overall danger safety piece of elopement treatment and assessment. The other piece is more the clinical one of how do you do an assessment of elopement without potentially inadvertently reinforcing elopement through attention. Because if you're trying to do any sort of assessment where you need some sort of repeatability measurement, well, elopement occurs. Well, what then? You sort of wait until the child gets bored and returns to your assessment setting? No, you go follow them. You bring them back to the location that you were in, meaning in that chunk of time, while the function of elopement could have been, say, escape or could have been access to tangible, you're now adding in the fact that you went after the child, you, as neutrally as possible, return them to the space. So there's always that piece of could attention be playing a role here that it shouldn't be? So anytime you see a study like this where it's just let's take as much information as we can about assessment and treatment of elopement and see what comes out in our consecutive controlled case series, great. It's going to give us more information that we as practitioners can use. So if you've never heard of the term elopement, or you're thinking like all these children running off and getting married in Vegas, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, quote, leaving a specific area without permission or supervision, end quote. Now, I know I sort of put it in as sort of a big disclaimer about safety. Some statistics regarding that safety from the authors. Drowning is the third most frequent cause of death by accidental injury in children under the age of 15 years old. And 74% of those cases started with elopement. So while elopement itself might not be that dangerous, the results of elopement can be fatal. Almost 50% of parents of autistic children report at least one elopement after their child turned 4 years old. And a CDC survey found that 25% of parents with autistic children and 35% of children with an intellectual developmental disability stated that their child had eloped over the past year, and that this is more likely to happen with parents who report that the child also engages in other challenging behaviors and might have emotional problems or just fewer self-care or adaptive skills. So some of our
it's a huge concern.
It is
for
very
many
huge.
Families.
A lot of times when you look at what basic sort of common sense answers for elopement they're pretty restrictive or costly. They're all antecedent based, things like the tracking devices that you can put on your child, the use of physical barriers, alarms on the door, which require parents to not only often pay a cost to have those treatments in place, they have to do a lot of upkeep with them. Even in, I think it was the CDC survey, the authors mentioned a lot of parents said that they did use those trackers, but they hadn't updated them in a long time. So they may not even still work the same way that they had when they first paid for these services.
These are safe strategies.
Yes, they're not bad
So
strategies.
If you have concerns about a child leaving the home, these are good to have in place.
Yes, this is not those are bad strategies, don't use them. It is those are the strategies that most families have access to. And even then, they're not foolproof. They require a lot of oversight and they can be costly. So they're not perfect solutions by any means. There's also no teaching involved in the use of these antecedent interventions. It's my grab bag. So let's off.
Diana's trying to steal your grab bag thunder.
Wait till the spirits speak to you about your article, Diana. So again, there's a lot of single case experimental design on elopement assessment and elopement treatment. There's one that's cited here. There's a randomized control trial by Hauer et al. In 2020 that looked at the use of behavior skills training and parent education on teaching parents to use a trial-based FA and to use a treatment package using differential reinforcement, extinction, non-contingent reinforcement, and response cost. And for the treatment group, they saw a significant decrease compared to their control group. So 42% of participants had a decreased report of elopement, but there's the problem versus 17%, in the control. But a problem with that study, while it's a big study of elopement treatment, it's a lot of parent reports. So it's not necessarily accurate or as accurate as we would want to say all of these are evidence-based practices for this specific population and with this specific target. There was also another retrospective study that's going to be similar to this one, but again, didn't give as much detail. So the author said, let's do this. Let's try to get the best recommendations around elopement assessment and treatment that we can do using the consecutive controlled case series, which basically boils down to, let's look in our archive here. I believe it was the Kennedy Krieger Institute, at least that's where many of the authors are from. Let's look at inpatients who were referred here for elopement, as well as some other challenging behaviors. And let's look at all of the work that was done to support an improvement in elopement outcomes. So decrease in elopement, increase in alternate skills, walking with an adult, walking with someone, walking to a place as instructed, right? And let's just take each study as it came in, and that's going to make our consecutive controlled case series, which always sounds like it's going to be super duper fancy as opposed to what it is, which is just like, let's take every single example we have and we'll kind of put it all together, knowing that these all were done with a level of experimental control in order. So that nicely will give us a big group of patients and a big group of outcomes and a little bit more chance of generality across the results, because these are the cases that came in and these are the assessments and treatments that were used and these are the results we got. So there's a little bit less room for some of the kind of experimental errors that you would see in some studies, or if you're just doing sort of like a big, data crunching analysis, statistics kind of study. So they looked at all the records of patients between 97 and 2020. If you had an FA for elopement during your admission and you had treatment for elopement and you had some sort of a single case experimental design in the treatment plan, so you had a reversal, use multiple baselines, something like that, great. You made it in. And you had to show functional control too. You saw that. You had a minimum of 20% IOA, diagnosis of autism for the patient, you're in. They had 17 treatment applications across 14 different patients, and from that, they summarized the results. All right. So this is a long article. I'm not going to go through every single bit in depth, because mostly what it boils down to is a lot of people did this, a lot of people did that, a lot of people did this, a lot of people did that. So I'm going to try to get to the meat of the general summary, but I don't want to skip anything, so I'm going to sort of just kind of go through this in chunks with sort of how I set up my...
thinking it like a trail mix than a meat dish.
Right? I don't know.
You got some peanuts. You got some, what else is in trail mix? M&Ms, you got some raisins, you got some pretzels, in terms of all of your different treatments that have been slated in here. But
gotcha.
No meat. I don't want any meat in my trail mix. No, thank you.
It's not going to keep on a hike.
How about jerky?
It'd be dried meat. Yeah, there you go. I wouldn't put that in trail mix, so I don't think it's going to mix well.
There's a person that doesn't really eat meat in that way.
I saw some trail mix that had like dried salmon skin in it, so it was like a spicy trail mix. It didn't have like M&Ms. It had other assorted items, and one of them was dried salmon skin, and that looked pretty good.
That sounds disgusting.
Anywho, some of the key components of all of these studies. So we had 14 participants, 13 males, 1 female, ages 5 to 21 years old. So a nice wide swath of ages here. They were at an inpatient hospital unit, and there were often multiple topographies of behavior that were being treated because they were posing a risk to the individual. They all stayed for about 3 to 8 months in this setting. They all had a diagnosis of autism and intellectual disability. The key components of the assessment, and these were kind of interesting ideas that you might need to be thinking of when you are conducting your own functional analyses of elopement in your setting, is making sure the assessment is safe. So, for example, they really did not want to use blocking as much as possible. A few times they would do assessments in hallways where there were open doors that children could elope to, and they might use a mat just sort of as more of a visual divider than say, no, don't go this way, or we're going to push you in this direction. So again, lots of opportunities for elopement in the assessment, and mats really just there to sort of limit the total space available. Other times they would use a giant auditorium with closed doors. So elopement could occur, but really the child was usually eloping within that space because there was so much space to elope to. So again, a nice minimal way to do risk while also being able to evoke elopement. Or they'd use classrooms that had connected rooms. So if you're, a lot of people I know in schools have a classroom and then a door, then another classroom and a door and another classroom, right? So that could be a safe space you could do an elopement assessment because the child can elope all they like. They're just going into another safe space. So some key...
Yeah, the classic Piazza FA on elopement, that's how they arranged it.
Yeah, and this isn't novel. It's not like you're reading this study and you're like, I've never heard of any of these things. The auditorium was new, but most of these are, hey, what if we took treatments that are already in the literature and we use them, but we just do it within the context of this experimental design?
I think eloping in an auditorium is automatically reinforcing. Like, I would also like to do that.
It's possible. It's possible. There were a lot of tables and charts.
Big spaces, you're like, I gotta run.
You just want to run around?
Yeah.
It could be. That was certainly a function they found a lot. Also, almost all of these studies had a generalization component to them. They would usually test the generality in other areas of the hospital. Then they'd add different adults. And as they were able to see safe rates of walking and low rates of elopement with the addition of the treatment, with each of these changes, they were able to start practicing within the community, adding parents, and then also adding in community providers, because just because you are a BCBA at this inpatient unit doesn't mean you're not going to continue to need BCBA support, or the family might not need that support outside of the clinic. So why not use people who will be able to help you in your community, right? So I thought that was a pretty neat addition. Sometimes they weren't able to go out in the community for factors usually having to do with either the patients not being able to stay in the hospital as long. So that was one of the factors. But for the most part, they did generalization with almost every patient they had. The main dependent variable was, you guessed it, elopement, which was defined as moving more than 3 feet from a caregiver without permission or leaving a confined area without a caregiver. Sometimes they'd add extra pieces, like if the participant was trying to pull on a door handle, that would count as elopement, even though they might still be within 3 feet of the individual. And then some had different definitions based on the context. So, for example, it would look different if you're in a closed area where the child was not able, or the individual was not able to get away, versus, say, in a hallway where there are plenty of places for that individual to go. And then they looked at rate most of the time. Sometimes they would also look at latency to elopement, but then they would just turn it into rate so that they could compare all the results of this controlled case series. The teams had a primary therapist, backup therapists, and the daily supervision of a BCBA at a faculty level, who all had extensive experience. And they did all the training for their therapists and backups in what treatments would be used. So, what kinds of assessments were used? Pretty much all of them used either a multi-element or a reversal or a combination of these designs. They do short sessions, 5 to 10 minutes. They usually just focus on like a couple test conditions. Pretty much attention, demand, ignore, alone, intangible were the ones they looked at. And then they'd have some sort of a comparison control that they would be looking at as well. With the attention condition, if elopement occurred, there was a lot of, hey, let's go back here, and verbal reprimands for 30 seconds. But they would not do a lot of blocking. They just sort of return to the space. With play, again, they let the child play with whatever item they eloped to for 30 seconds. With demands, they would do kind of least to most prompting to get the child to engage in the demands. And then if they eloped, they would end the demands for a period of time. However, there really were no demand-maintained elopement situations here. There were some combined, but demand was surprisingly not really a piece of a lot of this case series. And they just used least to most guidance to return to the original location. Or if they were in the large location, instead of doing that, they just bring the assessment to wherever the child had gotten to after the period of time had elapsed. Wow, I really loved that. So if you can find a big auditorium to do an elopement FA, great, there you go. Solves a lot of problems there.
Or creates them.
I think the biggest problem is going to be no one is going to give you an entire auditorium with which to like, let me do my assessment every day for the rest of this week. Like, probably not going to happen outside of very specialized environments like this. They had a few kind of small modifications to the FAs, but again, not that important. They do minimum of 3 sessions, just like you would with a good FA. Then they'd do competing stimulus assessments for a lot of participants to sort of see what would they engage with without eloping, or what would they not engage with that much, or engage with but also elope. And then they did a few stimulus avoidance assessments, which kind of just looked like an ignore condition, which they used with a number of items. And again, this was more just to inform the treatment that would then be used. So what treatments were used once all these assessments were done? Well, there was a lot of NCR. They used that with one patient who had an automatic function for elopement, 4 with tangible, 1 with attention, 1 with multiple. And if there was elopement, it would delay by 5 seconds. So again, it was a time-based presentation of an item, the competing item from that CSA assessment. So, you don't usually run with this. Let's wait a period of time. And then here's the item, because you're doing anything, you're not running. It would be the only thing that would delay the delivery. And they'd also just make it non-contingently available while walking. So this was available either when engaged with something else already and also when walking. They would use hand holding, not response blocking though, just holding a hand lightly. If the child pulled away and ran, they weren't grabbing their arm or grabbing into them. So they were just sort of holding. Most of the time they used hand holding right off the bat with all of these treatments. I think that's why they counted it as a treatment, even though I don't know if we necessarily consider hand holding the most advanced treatment, but almost everyone was getting their hand held while moving around the environment.
You just have to note that they allowed them to pull away.
Yes, they did. It was not response blocking in that regard.
Right. And you would not want to be holding someone's hand and then trying to like keep them next to you if they are pulling away, because especially if they're like a little kid, that could hurt their shoulder.
Yes. A lot of treatments used differential reinforcement of some kind. Sometimes they used a resetting interval for walking within an arm's reach. Sometimes they used it with compliance with demands around walking around. All of these then were thinned from either like continuous schedules to like FR10 schedules, or if it was a time interval, they usually go from almost immediate to about 5 minutes before the delivery of the reinforcer. Sometimes they use tokens. A lot of times they were also using multiple schedules. So for some of the participants who had especially tangible, 1 attention and 1 automatic, but for mostly a tangible function, they'd have a card on their lanyard that would say whether it was green or red. So green, if you ask for something, we'll go and walk with you to it. Red, no dice, you ain't getting it. You ask all you like. They also would do this for like waiting tasks as well as in walking. They'd also change it up for some. So like one context, there was a participant who just wanted to look out the window or look at things. So green would be, you can go look at that. Red would be, you cannot go look at that. And again, similar to differential reinforcement, all of these schedules would be thinned over time. A few had chained schedules where they'd use tokens. And if they'd earned tokens for appropriate behavior, then they could trade in their token board to get a break, which again, they thinned as well. They did use extinction a good amount of times for one case where elopement was automatically maintained, 6 tangibly maintained, 2 attention, 1 multiple. And basically it would just be a lot of like monitoring and no comments or emotional reactions, sort of just like maintaining them in the space. Sometimes this worked.
With signaled availability? Like was that overlapped with the DR?
Oh yeah, these are just the components they used. Most of the all of these were done in packages.
Right.
I'm just describing these are the main kind of treatment components that would be packaged together.
Okay.
Yeah. Mostly, again, with tangible, 2 for attention, and actually 2 for automatic were functional communication. Go see was one of the responses. So if the participant just wants to go, hey, you can say go see, and you'll get to go run. They would usually do delay tolerance training with, at least one case, they did delay tolerance training where they would just increase the amount of time before they'd let them go see. For one tangible function, they did social skills, looking at preferred ways to play. There were a few packages that did end up having response blocking. So one of the automatic packages, 2 of the tangible, 1 of the attention, where they just were not allowed to run. Sometimes they would use response blocking at a start if it was unsafe and then fade it over time. And then one actually was response blocking. They had a harness. So it was like one of those like kid leashes that they had. And then 2 had sort of punishment type procedures. One's timeout, a visual screen timeout where they would hold a screen or their hand in front of the person's face. They wouldn't touch them, but just so they couldn't really see where they were looking. That was in one treatment with automatic function and one with multiple functions. Multiple functions pretty much was always I think it almost always included automatic as one of the functions in the multiply maintained behavior. And then one had a basket hold, when even with all the treatments in place, it was automatic function. They were not able to get the rates low enough for safety. So they did add a 30-second basket hold. Then they'd return to the previous activity. This study did a great job of describing how all of the previous research that had been done really included families. Every week, they'd say, here's what we're working on. Here are the procedures. Do you think these procedures would be usable once your child leaves the hospital, which is so great. And that kept happening. So we talk about social validity a lot. That's more of a social validity where it's throughout the whole study. It wasn't like they waited till the end and they said, here's what we did. We know it worked because we did the experimental control. What do you think out of a 5 scale? So they were getting a lot of feedback from the families throughout about whether or not these would be feasible treatments before they started engaging in generality trials. They'd always look for kind of an 80% decrease before sort of switching it up more, or at least stability at an 80% decrease before, like, let's go out in the community, let's switch in new people, right? So again, what we mostly saw were good effects. For automatic function, there was like a 91.88% response reduction across all of these studies, so 17 treatments. Tangible was 95.5% reduction. Attention, 97.20% reduction. The lowest was multiple, so 82.97% reduction. So again, above their goal of 80%. 14 treatments did reach their target goal. 2 didn't, but mostly because 1 left the hospital too early, so they weren't able to finish the study. And then 1 because the final treatment actually had a few elevated points, so it sort of threw the numbers off a little bit. So treatment for automatically maintained elopement was the most successful overall. Tangible was also very successful, 7 out of 9 of the cases. Attention was also very successful. And then 1 of the 2 multiples reached 80% in reduction. So what did they use the most in these packages? Extinction was used in 10 out of the 17 treatments. Functional communication was used in 10.
Keep in mind, extinction is part of FCT.
Yes. But they're breaking it out as a separate piece of how they're using it.
Okay.
Multiple schedules of reinforcement were used in 8 cases. NCR was used in 7 cases. So mostly reinforcement strategies were used with some antecedent-based strategies and some instructional methods. Punishment was only used in 5 of the treatments. So punishment does not need to be a component of your elopement treatment. And in terms of generality, you mostly saw good results there in terms of moving to other places of the community. Some final thoughts they had when we're thinking of elopement. It's not, I think most people think of elopement as running away, but they described elopement as it's more often than not running to something or running for fun. There are some studies, one of them was a Boyle study, where there were more escape maintained elopement episodes. However, even in that research, it was like 25% of the cases they were looking at were escape maintained. So elopement, I think everyone thinks of it like they're running away. More often than not, running to is a better description, although do your assessment to be sure of the case. And things like tangible and attention functions, just like we would expect, tends to have better outcomes because you're able to have more stimulus control versus automatic functions, which can be much harder to do so. Multiple functions are the most challenging because the motivation to engage in which function is going to vary, and it's not necessarily easy to predict. All right, so if you are doing an elopement assessment, make sure you, A, have either done it before or work with someone who has done it before. Consult if need be. And B, make sure that you're working with families and other providers, because just treating elopement in one setting is not good enough. And if parents don't have supports in using some of these treatment packages outside of your setting, that's not good. So again, you might be working with multiple providers. Make sure you're getting their feedback about what can work versus what should work. And when you're looking at your elopement FAs, try to use something like a duration-based FA rather than some of the other techniques, because it's probably going to be a lot quicker and safer to use those. And see if you can find a nice large area or conjoined rooms, because you do not need to block in your assessment. However, if you can't find these spaces, it might be hard to do so without blocking. So again, some things to look at there. We don't know a lot about escape, though, because it wasn't in this study. But for everything else, here's a nice summary of some things you could be exploring. The end.
Woo!
I know, it's a long one, but it had a lot of... Love these.
It was good. You almost did a whole podcast on that one paper.
Almost, but we still got plenty of time to talk about other things. But first, let's take a break. Let's elope to a break. and then we'll come right back.
Hi, do you want to be a BCBA, also known as a board certified behavior analyst?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts to get your graduate degree, just minutes outside of Boston.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education, dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years.
And our 2022 graduates had a 92% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy approved fieldwork placements, ethics mini handbooks, PhD levels professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland if interested.
And don't forget, our program is accredited by the Association of Behavior Analysis International, or ABAI, as a Tier 1 master's degree program.
Don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu.
regiscollege.edu.
One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there.
Bye.
And we are back talking about the spring grab bag. So we don't know what we're talking about next. Who knows? We talked about elopement. What'll be next? But first, I want to remind our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening, you're able to earn 1 CE. All you need to do is finish listening and go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in your podcast player. Put in some key information, including 2 secret code words. And the first one is muck, M-U-C-K. Like, it's a bunch of gross stuff. You might have to get down in it. Yuck. It's not yuck, though.
Or you want to get down in it.
I don't know. It's probably gross. That's why it's muck. It's like muddy, maybe, or sewage. I don't know. I don't want to think about this muck. Blech. Just type it and move on. Muck. All right. Who of the spirits told us we're going to go into the bag next? It looks like
Me.
Jackie.
Shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it. So, oh yeah, Rob, I wanted to ask, why did you choose that article?
Because I know we hadn't talked about elopement in a long time. And I love articles that are, we're going to look at a whole bunch of studies at once. And in the end, you'll have a whole bunch of ideas to pull from based on all the research, because I think it is an efficient way to improve one's practice without necessarily reading every single elopement article, which again, when you can do it, it's great. But reading the same articles for the same, you tend to get a pattern over a while. So when you can sum it up, it's a little bit faster.
Cool.
My son might say, use AI to sum it up. And I will say, no, that deadens your skills at summarizing your own stuff. Don't do it.
I like it. Okay, so I chose my article, so I'll tell you what my article is an article entitled Evaluating Remote Behavioral Skills Training of Online Gaming Safety Skills. This one does not fit me at all, right? Because if listen to
That's
the
what
episode,
Diana said.
know that I do not I'm not a gamer. I refuse to let my child play online games. And so, but
Want to say the authors and stuff?
yeah, I will. I would just wanted to give the rationale why, and then I'll do the whole reference. But one of my students is really interested in this and doing a thesis. And so I said, I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna read this article and see what it's about. So this
Jackie
article,
played so much Fortnite preparing for this episode.
they don't even talk about Fortnite. Obviously, you didn't read my article. But this article is by Santa Cruz, MIltenburger, and Baruni in 2024. This was in Behavior Analysis and Practice. And this study I was really excited about reading because it is a replication and extension of the abduction prevention articles that MIltenburger has written in the past about how to teach children how to safely leave an abductive situation. And I love the stretch to thinking about this during online gaming. And so they give some whopping statistics that 57% of children and adolescents that play games online have met a new friend while online gaming. And parents that's a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a lot. And although most of the time those those new acquaintances and new friends are harmless, they could also be predatory in nature, right? The other statistic that they gave is that sexual and predatory encounters were about 1 in 5 adolescents experienced unwanted sexual materials in online gaming, and 1 in 9 experienced sexual solicitation. And that was according to a research article by Madigan in 2015. And so there's really a lot of limited research on how to teach children how to be safe when they're on that online gaming. There was one research that looked at an intervention called CAS, Cross-Age Teaching Zone, where older students served as mentors for younger students and created a 30-minute training on how to be safe in an online environment and presented it to the younger students. And like a post questionnaire suggested that the students that took CAS, I just like saying it, I love when people make acronyms, they did better than students that didn't, but then they didn't assess it in the real world, right? And so that's
fortunately, we know from experience, if you can do it on a written test, you probably can do it perfectly in real life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's how my whole life is. I did a boater safety course and I took the boater safety quiz and passed, and now I have a boater license. But
I'm sure you've never had a problem with safety in your boat.
I have actually. Yeah. And so then, we see that this is a problem. We actually know that behavioral skills training has been really helpful and effective in training safety skills about like to poison, to firearms, right? To abduction prevention. This is all MIltenburger's lab. I mean, my goodness, it's amazing. But one limitation of the research is that students may do really well in the training session, but may not demonstrate the skills in a real situation, right? But we really want them to demonstrate the skills in the real situation here. And so that's why they've noticed that behavioral skills training, BST, paired with in situ training has also been really successful now. So in situ is like assessing the skill in the natural setting. And then if it isn't there, you keep teaching it until it is.
Then the experimenter bursts in and
says, hey,
actually touch the gun.
Yeah.
Do you think Raymond Miltenberger just is like, I want to make a whole bunch of research where I can just burst in like the Kool-Aid man at the end? It's like, no, don't do that.
That's a secret dream, right? His secret dream is to be the Kool-Aid man.
Kids, you can grow up to do whatever you want, no matter what your field is. Just bring your passions to it.
He's gonna email us and be like, "How did you find out? How did you find out my dream?"
He starts every email by going, "Oh yeah."
Innovative approach for very real problems, right? Like you have to commend him and his lab.
Yes, 100%.
We are a fan of Miltenberger BST studies.
I am a super fan. And so what he posits is that when you are teaching kids safety skills around strangers, that's very similar to teaching kids safety skills when you're online gaming, right? So instead, they're going to follow the same 3-step approach that they use in their previous studies. Instead of saying no and running away, right, because that would be weird by yourself, you're just going to exit the game. So the exit the game is the same as saying no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Low response effort, too.
So the first step is not engaging with the Confederate. So if the Confederate's like, when's your birthday? You don't say anything. The second step is turning the game off. And then the third step is immediately go telling an adult, right? So instead of saying no and running away, you don't want to know and run away in your own home because that's weird. So, I mean, I guess it's not that weird, but it might not be helpful. So that is what they were doing. So they had 2 participants. They were boys, 7 and 9, and they recruited from a flyer on social media. And the boys played a game that I've never heard of, but it's called Among Us. Have you heard of it?
That's where sus comes from.
Yeah, it's like you look like a little alien. They look little alien guys.
Yeah, little space helmets, and they go around, and someone's the murderer, or I think it's a murderer. Someone's the bad guy, and you have to try to figure out who it is.
Okay, yes. So in this game, you work with people that you might not know, friends and strangers, to figure out who the murderer is, right? And usually the game lasts between like 7 to 15 minutes. And luckily, I guess, for the experimenters, there is a lobby before the game starts where all of the, you like get invited to the lobby for the specific game. And that's where all like the chatting happens. So that is where the experimenters were going to lure the participants in that really nice lobby. So informed consent was provided by the parents, and verbal assent from both participants, but they didn't tell the participants they were teaching them about online safety. They told them that they were doing a research study to watch how people played video games, right? Because they couldn't be like,
Okay.
we want to teach you online safety before
Right.
they assessed it, right? So they did use deception in this study, but they covered their bases really nicely. And so they debriefed the parents, right? Prior to that, all of the Confederates were research assistants that would change their avatars or usernames each time, so it looked like there was different people in the lobby.
Yeah.
And it was a private lobby. Like you got
Right.
a code, so there wasn't like other people in the game.
Yeah, there are ways to do that, yeah.
Yeah, I did not know that. And they allowed the participants to play the game outside of the session, right? They didn't tell them that they couldn't play this game ever to increase the believability. And they played after they were out of the lobby, the research assistants actually did play the game with the participants, right? And they let them win half of the time so that they'd want to play. So I love that. Yeah. So you needed a smartphone, a tablet, or a computer to play the game Among Us. They used the BS skill, the BST in a remote format. So they invited them to a Microsoft Teams. They talked to them about safety. Then they have them watch a video of somebody playing the game and receiving one of the different lures that they talked about. And they gave a whole appendix. It's like, what's your birthday? Do you live in Florida? Oh, are you a boy like me? What's your age? Those types of things. They didn't make them sexual by nature, right? They just had them give them personal information. And and then during the in situ training, they allowed the parents to watch a video and train on how they could respond to their kids' lures, right? And I'll tell you what they did there. So it was pretty neat. Yeah. So they used a task analysis to assess student responding or participant responding. So if you did not avoid the lure, you automatically got a 0. Right? So if you responded to the Confederate, even if you just said, hey, I'm not going to give you this information, you automatically got a 0. If you did not respond to the lure but did not exit the game, right? You just kept playing, you got a 1. If you did not respond and exit the game but did not tell the caregiver, you got a 2. And if you did everything correctly, which is not respond, leave the game, tell a caregiver within 20 seconds, you got a 3. So they played a few rounds of Among Us, and each round usually lasted between 7 to 15 minutes, and the whole session really lasted 30 minutes to an hour, right? And the ratio of lures to non-lures, like game playing in the lobby, was 1 to 3. So they wanted to make sure that they weren't just throwing lures at the kids to make it believable. So they began the game and created the private lobby, and the research assistants were in the game. They created a username each time. They provided general praise during the game, but didn't talk about anything about the lure, right? And during the initial assessment, they engaged in the lure directly to the participant in a private chat, right? And if the student engaged in a lure, then they ignored the lure, and then they kept playing the game. If the participant did not engage in the lure, then the other Confederates said that they had to go, and then they exited the game. So that's what they did in the beginning. Yeah. And then they conducted IOA, and there was 100% of IOA. So that's pretty great. They did treatment integrity sessions. The researchers got 100% and the mom got 90%. And they used weekly social validity checks to make sure that the students were not scared or the participants were not scared of continuing playing games, and that they felt confident and the mom felt safe. So they were very open and honest and transparent with the procedures the whole time. So in the remote behavioral skills training, they went to a remote session, they watched a video about the lures, then they did a role play, and they invited the participant to join the private chat in Among Us, right? They pretended that the researcher was a stranger, and the researcher provided a lure, and then they needed to engage in those 3 responses. And if they did, great. If they did a three across 3 consecutive sessions, they passed BST. And then 1 to 3 days later, they were asking the parents the kids would ask the parents if they could play Among Us. Then the parent would pretend to be busy, like doing laundry in the same room, and pretend that they got a phone call and it would really be the researcher. So the researcher would tell the parent when they were going to lure and what kind of lure, so that the parent could then loom over and see what the participant did, which is actually kind of clever,
Yeah.
right? And if the student or if the participant did all of the things, then the parent would praise. And if not, the parent could jump in really quickly and provide, the modeling, role play, and feedback until they got it correctly. So if they didn't, like say they didn't come over and tell her, they stopped, they pretended that the lure happened again, they ran through the steps, and then they had to come over to her. And so that's what IST looked like. And if they did not engage in it, then they would do booster sessions. The graphs look really great. During baseline, most of the kids were getting 0s and 1s. Well, there's only 2 kids, right? So both of them were getting 0 and 1s. And then following remote base behavioral skills training, they were engaging in the skill 100% of the time. And then during the follow-up, which was the 1 to 3 days later, one of the students did perfectly. The other one of the students, there was a lure, 20 seconds happened, and he didn't do anything. And so his mom intervened, and he's like, I didn't see the lure.
Yeah.
So he didn't see it. So that was one of the limitations. It's unclear as if, did he really get that 1 at that follow-up? Or really he said that he didn't see the lure. So it's possible that he really did know what he was doing, right? But he didn't see the lure as if he said. So so that's really good. Across the social validity every week, the parents thought that the study prepared the kids to act maturely in the game, and they're not avoiding the game. And so the parents were really happy with the study, and that they felt like their kids now could act more responsibly in the online gaming world. They felt less worried. The strength of the study was that remote nature, right? That everything was done remote, and the parents could help and assist, so that you lost all of the traveling time, right? And the time that's associated with going in person. And this might provide a model for development of online safety, right? Because it was actually really clever that they could use one research assistant sometimes that had multiple computers with multiple users if they didn't have a lot of them, that they could just keep switching their names. Although one of the participants did say that one of the characters kept coming back. That wasn't true. It was just how he was writing. Like he was always writing in lowercase and the other ones were writing in uppercase. And so once this kid said that, he was confused. He was like, well, this participant with this user kept coming back. He wasn't a stranger. And they're like, oh. So then they had to mix things up. And once that happened, the kid didn't say that again. So who knows there?
Super sus.
Right?
Very
Super sus. So the limitation really is that we don't really know if that one participant score was really a 1 in follow-up, or if you didn't see it.
Yeah.
And we don't know if the kids really thought they were playing with strangers, right? Because they did say that they were like, oh no, this one user kept coming back. And we don't know if the kid was confused or what. So they said that they should keep looking into that. But what a cool study.
Yeah, it's really neat.
That's really cool.
It's a really good way to take a real problem and think about, well, how can we make it
easy
using
too.
what we know about training and
Right.
I don't know if it was easy. I don't know. I think it probably was not easy to get through the IRB.
No.
They did a really good job.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I know.
And there were only 2 participants, right? I'm sure that was a limitation.
Yeah.
They said
That
that
was
too.
talked about. Yeah.
And one mom.
Very cool. And a mom. All right. Well, Diana, let's wrap it up with your grab bag magic.
Great. So my article is titled Comparing Equivalence-Based Instruction to a PowerPoint Video Lecture to Teach Differential Reinforcement Descriptors to College Students by Kelly Siskin, Reeve, McFeeters, Vladescu, Reeve, and Jennings. And that was published in Behavioral Interventions, hot off the press for 2025.
So Diana, of the 3 of us, you did actually pick an article that is similar to the articles you usually pick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So you weren't comfortable about going outside your zone?
Oh, I don't know. I just thought this sounded cool.
Okay.
So I wanted to read about it, but I wanted to let you all know, if you haven't been on the Behavioral Interventions page to look at a 2025 article, is Behavioral Interventions got a glow up.
Oh.
New title, front page where the logo is and the font for the title of the article. is jazzed up and new and different. So you can go check that out. It looks very swanky. So this is one of the first articles of this current year. And it was pretty cool. So what they wanted to do was think about how we can best teach college students. So yes, of course, it does make sense that I was interested in this article because I also want to make sure that we know how to best teach college students, including graduate students. And I've done some research in this type of area in the past myself. So they said, should we use equivalence-based instruction, which is EBI? Yeah, this has been done before. There is a fair amount of research actually demonstrating its effectiveness across a whole variety of topics, both behavior analytic and not. So this has been used to teach functions of behavior, schedules of reinforcement, visual analysis of graphed data, verbal operants, but then also statistics, mathematics, neuroanatomy terms, etc. So there's a lot out there already. When we say equivalence-based instruction, what do we really mean? Our authors gave us a fancy schmancy definition of that, which was, quote, teaching specific, overlapping, conditional discriminations among physically separate stimuli, resulting in the emergence of untaught, derived stimulus relations. End quote.
Ooh.
I know. So,
Okay.
you're like, but what did that mean? So then if you want to translate that, what generally that means is that they most often use match to sample procedures to establish an equivalence class. So that's where you teach a set of stimuli that are related to one another. And in doing so, you get additional stimuli relations for free, right? So it's thought to be a shortcut way to teach some things and then get additional learning. So it's really focusing on the effectiveness and efficiency of teaching. But they said, not everyone really knows how to do EBI, and it can be kind of cumbersome to get this whole process set up and understand, how to do it properly. So maybe there are some people, some teachers who are going to do this, but maybe not everybody does. So we shouldn't just focus on the fact that it is an effective teaching method. We should be comparing it to more traditional higher education teaching methods, which includes, of course, the standard PowerPoint lecture. So there are 2 studies out there currently that have looked at this. Ostrowski and colleagues, 2022, did a comparison between equivalence-based instruction and a lecture-style approach for reinforcement and punishment contingencies, teaching that skill. And then Lovett et al. In 2021 did the same thing for teaching various single-subject research designs. Yeah. And so in both of those cases, equivalence-based instruction was more effective. But they said this is a pretty small sample thus far of these types of studies, so let's add to that. How about differential reinforcement procedures? This is, again, very commonly taught skill for graduate students of behavior analysis, although this population was actually undergrad. But very popular, of course, in our realm, right? This is something people need to know. Is this the type of skill that could be taught via EBI, and how does that compare with skill acquisition from a lecture PowerPoint perspective? So that's what they set out to do. And in this study, they had 8 undergrad psychology students who were included. They were aged 20 to 29. 6 were females, 2 were males as they identified themselves. And they got extra credit for participating. So just so you know. And they did not indicate that they had previous experience with differential reinforcement procedures, either running them or even knowing what they were. And this was largely done on the computer. So the EBI was done with a computer-based MTS trial system that they had set up. And then the PowerPoint lectures were actually video recorded lectures too. So all of that was presented via computer. But there were some in-person things that they did as well, which were part of the pre and post test, which I will tell you about in a second. And for the equivalent stimuli, there were 3 classes taught. So there was a class of stimuli for DRO, differential reinforcement of other behavior, Jackie's favorite, of course. A class of stimuli for DRA, differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, and then a class of stimuli for DRI, differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. And then within each of those classes, there were 3 stimuli that were taught that we were working to establish the equivalence relation between. That was the text label. So it was like written textually, right? So like DRO. The textual definition, what is a DRO? And then a text vignette, an example, basically. of a DRO. And they had 2 training vignettes and then 1 probe vignette so they could check for generality of that. And so each of those DRO, DRA, DRI had those 3 terms that they were looking to establish within them. I told you that there were some pretests, and there was like actually a whole bunch of pretests. So there was a card sorting pretest where they gave them like a bunch of cards with these varying things on them and said, put these into piles. And those were like actual index cards with things typed on them. And then they had a written pretest, which was also, I believe, on a piece of paper. And in that, they had to write a definition for each of the 3. And then there were 12 multiple choice questions to answer related to the differential reinforcement procedures. So all of that happened first. And then after that, then they had a computer pretest with all of these varying MTS setups, match to sample setups for all of the potential equivalence relations. There were 84 trials in this pretest. So all the potential baseline relations, which was the label to the definition and the label to the vignette, those were tested. And the derived symmetry relations, which was the definition to the label and the vignette to the label, those were tested.
It's a long test.
And then the equivalence, derived equivalence relations, which were the vignette to the definition and the definition to the vignette, those were tested. Each of those was all presented twice. And then also the generalization probe vignettes were added in there as well, relating back. Right. So that was just the pretest to see.
Woo!
I know. And lo and behold, people did not know that. And then from
Surprise.
there.
Surprise.
Yeah. They're like, we already told you we don't know about these things, but now you've tested it.
They all did great, and the study was over.
Yeah.
They probably felt so sad. That's like a lot of getting it wrong.
I know, right? I 100% agree. And that's often like, I feel like the challenge in this equivalence-based work, matrix training, right? There's just so much probe that has to happen for you to be able to demonstrate the effectiveness of these skills that it feels like serious overkill. But all that happened. And then after that, they were split into 2 groups. So one group of 4 received the EBI, the equivalence-based instruction training, and then the other group received the PowerPoint lecture training. The training went down.
Kidding.
Maybe it had lots of cool memes, though. You don't know what this PowerPoint
I'm
looked
totally
like.
joking. I use PowerPoint.
Flashing words.
I don't think so. I think it was plain. They didn't show us. I don't think it was exciting because that's like an additional factor to.
Was it one of those PowerPoints where it's like header, so much text, header, so much text, and you're like, just send this to me. Don't narrate this. I'll read the PowerPoints.
No, I'm going to tell you what was in the PowerPoints. Okay. Well, first I'm going to tell you what the equivalence-based instruction looked like. It was just as you would imagine it would be if you also had to read Murray Sidman's book, Equivalence Relations, or if you know anything about equivalence relations. So they taught the term to the definition via match to sample until mastery. And then they tested for the definition to the term, which is the symmetry relation. And those were in 9-block trials, and you needed to get 89% correct. And then once you did that, then they went on and they taught the term to vignette in training via match to sample for both the vignettes. And in doing so, that meant that there was 18-block trials for this one because they tested for both, and you had to get 89% mastery at that. And then after that, they tested for the emergence of the equivalence relations, which were the definition matched to the vignette and the vignette matched to the definition. And at any point during all of that, if you didn't meet mastery criteria, there was retraining occurred. Now, the control group, it was not maybe so involved. They got a voiceover PowerPoint, and it had the same information in it. It was presented in the same way. So they were set up kind of like the MTS trials were, except they were telling you what the correct answers were. So here, the first 3 slides told you the definitions of the text terms, and then the next 6 slides gave the training vignettes and how they related back to the text terms. The duration of this was 10 minutes. The participants could take notes if they wanted to. And that was that. So there was no testing for mastery within the training for the PowerPoint lecture. You just got it and you were done. Much like a lecture.
Yeah.
That's how a lecture happens, right? Yeah. And then after that, so once both groups received their training, everybody got the post-test, which was just like the pre-test. And then they did the card sorting post-test again. And then they did the written post-test, which was the fill in the blanks and the multiple choices again. And then after a week, it was maintenance. And they did it again.
These participants are diehard.
I know, right? I hope that they
full-time job
took something important away and got good extra credit. And they also learned, right? So I'll move on to the results now to let you know that they did learn. Oh, and IOA and PI were both 100%. So that was good. So then that brought us to looking at what the results looked like. And in the pretest, both groups were not at mastery level for any of the ways in which these equivalence relations were being evaluated. So on the computer MTS program, they were not at mastery. In the fill in the blank questions, everybody was real low and not anywhere near mastery. Most people were zero. One person was at like 30% in both groups. Yep. And then I'm sorry, the MTS, it was, everyone was between 30 and 50% basically. So that's kind of chance, right? And then in the multiple choice, there was some variation in the pretest, what each participant's initial scores were there, but it was below 50 or 60% for everyone. So that was not at mastery across both groups, EBI and lecture. And then so in the post-test, for our EBI group, the computer-based match to sample scores shot up. Everyone was between 70 to 100. So not exactly the 89% mastery that they were shooting for there, but a good amount of knowledge was demonstrated. For the lecture group, some folks improved their scores. 2 people improved their scores. 2 of their scores basically stayed the same. And the mean was like 60% for that group compared to the 85% mean for the EBI group. So that was on the computer. And then for the fill in the blank and multiple choice tests, again, the EBI group, their scores increased considerably. This was the one where they had the post-test and the maintenance. So post-test scores, again, shot up 70 to 100% for the fill in the blank, 80 to 100% for the multiple choice. And these results were maintained or increased at the maintenance point, which is kind of cool. And then the lecture group, for this group, 3 of the 4 participants greatly improved their scores for both the fill in the blank and the multiple choice. 1 person went from 0 to 60, and then 2 people went from 0 to 100. 1 person scores never got above 30%. And that was true for both the fill in the blank and the multiple choice. So our takeaway from this is that equivalence-based instruction increased scores in all of these ways in which we were taking potential data, right? The way that they were taught, they were then able to demonstrate those skills in the post-test very clearly. For the lecture group, it was variable, the increases in scores, but they did, 3 out of 4 of them did well on the post-test, even with the 10-minute lecture that didn't involve as much training as we might say that the equivalence-based one did. When we look at the social validity here, the equivalence-based group rated slightly higher confidence in their skills at post. However, they were less happy with the time commitment, which one might, kind of guess, right? I looked through many times and I couldn't find them telling us how long the training took. And I don't know if I just missed it, and that's possible. The lecture was only 10 minutes, but I would think learning all of these equivalence relations would take longer than that. I couldn't find where it said it, and if I missed it, I'm sorry. But there was a time differential one would expect to see in terms of the length of training condition. Both groups liked the method that they were given. They said they would use that again in the future, so take from that what you will. One thing that they noted is that, maybe overall, the EBI group did do better, and maybe that was because active responding was part of their treatment package, and it was not part of the lecture group. Across the board, when we are looking at effective training programs, active responding is thought to be an important component there that goes all the way back to Skinner. And so that was reflected here. That was kind of like their hypothesis. They said maybe these concepts were kind of too complex for teaching in this format, although in the realm of things that need to be taught, right, for graduate students, I would consider these to not be particularly complex skills. And they said, the benefits are present, but if we start to take into consideration that we saw changes in responding for both groups in some topographies, right? And that EBI can take a really long time to set up and understand how to properly implement. Maybe some of the gains that we're seeing in that group are like kind of coming out in the wash a little bit. However, my takeaway is, luckily for us in the real world, we don't have to make the distinction between these two, right? You could create a great instruction-based program for your students to do as part of their homework and preparation for the class, and then you could come to class and spend 10 minutes reviewing that. They get the best of both worlds, and I bet you they will have learned the skill. So in terms of like real-life application, there are some takeaways, and then in terms of research, there are some takeaways. But it shouldn't shock anybody that this equivalence training was effective. There just maybe some future research could still be done in this arena.
Well, that brings us to the end of our grab bag. And since it's a grab bag, we don't really have a coherent theme for pairings or for dissemination station. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing a variety of different updates and articles today. And maybe it's sunny outside. You can go enjoy the wet spring or hot spring. I don't know what your spring's like. Whatever your spring is like, hopefully you can now go enjoy it, having learned some new stuff. Thank you so much for listening to ABA Inside Track. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to get your podcasts. If you want even more content, including our most recent book club episode a year before the whole wide world is going to get it, you can join us on patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can join at the $5 or $10 levels to get access to our listener choice episodes. The book club episodes are at the $10 level to get free CEs, as well as to vote on our upcoming, it's not in the spring, it's in the summer, our upcoming 2025-2026 book club extravaganza. Choose the books for the year. But you can only do that at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. I also want to make sure...
Yeah, I was making sure that you were going to give them the last code word.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now.
Cool.
Gotta make sure y'all get the last code word, which is frump. FRUMP. It's like, when you go out and you're wearing like the baggiest t-shirt you can find and like some pants that have like dinner stains all over them and your hair's a mess and you kind of have a frowny face. People might say, look out for that, frump. Like, bleh. It's what you might look like because you've been gardening all day in the rain or whatever. It's going to make you look like a frump. Frump. All right, some final thanks. Thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with another normal episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye!